Welcome, second graders. My name is Tony Harris, and I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and a Cherokee elder. And I'm here today to talk to you about the Cherokees and how they lived in Georgia prior to the Trail of Tears. But first of all, I want to start off by teaching you a couple of Cherokee words. The first one is OCO. Can you say that? OCO. And OCO is Cherokee for hello. And the second word is wado. Wado. And wado means thank you or thanks. So now you know two Cherokee words that we can use during the presentation, and you'll be able to practice that afterwards. I want to start off today talking about some of the plants the Cherokees used for food. And this was very important. One of the basic things the Cherokees used for food was corn. And they basically grew three different types of corn. There was the yellow flower corn, the white flower corn, and then they also grew the flying eagle corn. And none of these they ate on the cob. They would let them stay on the stalk until they dried, and then they would take them off and store them until they were ready to grind them up. And they'd grind them real fine to make flour and less fine to make cornmeal. Now, the unique thing about the flying eagle corn is that most of the kernels on this corn are white, but on top of the kernel there's a black emblem that looks very much like an eagle in flight. So they call that the flying eagle corn. Now they planted what's known as the Three Sisters. And the Three Sisters was corn, beans, and squash. And what the Cherokees would do, they would plant the corn, and when it got about this tall, they would plant the beans along the base of the corn. And what that did was the corn provided a trellis for the beans to grow up on to get into the sunlight. They needed the sunlight. And the thing about the beans gave the corn nitrogen. Because it produced extra nitrogen, and it put that in the soil, and that's what corn likes, is nitrogen. And then once they planted those, they would come back and plant the squash along the base of the row, and that did two or three things. It kept the moisture level the same along the base of the plants, kept the weeds down, and it allowed the Cherokees to produce more food in a small area. Now, in the picture here, you can see the corn actually growing on the trellis. This corn will get about 10 feet tall, and the ears can get that long. And so that's called the Three Sisters. Now then, the Cherokees also ate a lot of fish. And you see a picture here of a Cherokee fish trap. And that's where the Cherokees would take rocks and they'd make a U shape in the water, and it would cause the fish to go down in the point of there, and they would net those fish out and harvest them and take them back to their log cabins. And what they didn't eat that day, they would clean and store in their smokehouses. And so fish was very important. A lot of the Cherokee homes were located next to rivers and streams because they relied on fish as a source of protein year round. Now then, the Cherokees also played games, and one of the favorite games that they played was called stickball. And you'll see here a picture of Cherokee's children playing stickball. And they used a racket just like this and a ball. This was actually a nut from uh, buckeye, and they covered it with leather. And the idea was to catch this in the air and throw it back across the top of a pole, and that would cause a score. They played a lot of this in North Georgia, especially in an area in North Georgia they now call ball ground. So it's still played today, and that's a picture of the Cherokees playing that in the field. Now then, the Cherokees also were very much into arts and crafts. And what they would do is they would take something like, this is a bucket gourd, and this black face you see on the left here is actually of like a bear. And they would cut the front of this out. This would be the nose down here. They'd put the eyes up here, and they put ears up here, and they'd paint this black and cut that in half, and then they'd wear these masks as they would play, and also have stomp dances. Now then, they also made baskets, and this was made from vines, and the colored part of the baskets, they colored with things like blackberries or black walnut juice, and but this was made by Cherokees. Now the Cherokees grew things on farms. They had farms, and this is a picture of a Cherokee log cabin on the left, and also a picture of a Cherokee smokehouse. Now, a smokehouse is simply a small building where they would hang meat up in. It could be fish, it could be pork or beef or whatever, and they'd build a fire in one end, a small fire, and that smoke would cure that meat and keep it from spoiling, so that they would have meat to eat, in future days and months. They didn't live in teepees. They lived in log cabins, and this is very much like what a log cabin would look like. My grandparents lived in a log cabin in Oklahoma for some time, and my grandfather helped my father build that log cabin. And I remember my mother talking about living in a Cherokee log cabin. Now the Cherokees raised a lot of plants, and they used plants for different things. They used plants for medicine. They used plants for food. They used it for arts and crafts, and also for religious ceremonies. Now, pictured here on the left is a picture of bloodroot. That's with a white bloom there. Well, that bulb there at the bottom, if you were to break that apart, there's a juice in there, and when that juice comes in contact with the air, it turns blood red. And the Cherokees would use that as a red dye. And every color had a significance to the Cherokees, and red was significant in that it was a sign of success. And that's the reason why a lot of the chief's clothing was in red, and a lot of the artwork is in red. But they had also used this plant for medicine, because that juice, the Cherokees discovered that juice could be used to cure poison ivy. And it was also a very effective insect repellent. So both of those were important if you were in the woods a lot. Now, also on the right there is a picture of wild onions. And they ate the wild onions. And they only ate the dark green tops that you see pictured there. They don't eat the white part because that's very tough and chewy, and it's not very tasty. But my mother would have me go gather wild onions when I was growing up, and she would chop those up and scramble them in eggs. And it's almost like a chive that you would scramble in eggs. It's kind of a mild onion. And this is very significant because there's actually a wild onion festival in Oklahoma in the Cherokee Nation every year in April and May. And they even, it's very serious, they would even have a Miss Wild Onion. And that was a very competitive race because a scholarship was awarded to the winner of the Miss Wild Onion each year. So they use that as food, and they're quite tasty.
Okay.
Now then, the Cherokees grew gourds, and there's several different types of gourds. This little gourd right here is called a jewelry gourd. And girls would take this and drill a little hole in the top here, put a string through it, and then wrap this around their ear and use it as an earring. Or they would put it on a string, a bunch of them on a string, and make necklaces out of it. So this is called a jewelry gourd, and this is as big as this gets. They also grew a dipper gourd. And this is a dipper gourd, a long neck, and look at the beautiful colors that naturally occur when this dries. Now, the Cherokees would take a hole, they'd drill a hole in this like this and take the seeds out. Then they would use this as a dipper to dip water or any other liquid they wanted to, a dipper gourd. But you know what the Cherokee children would do? They would take this, drill a hole up here, and then drill a hole here and hang this in a tree to make a bird's nest. And the birds could come in here and lay their eggs and raise their young. And so they would always hang it in a tree where they could watch as the birds would come in and out and watch as the birds matured and flew off. So they used it as a bird's nest as well. Now this is a bucket gourd. Now these can get real big, but the Cherokees would take this bucket gourd and they would drill the top out and take the seeds out, and they would use this to store things in, like they would store seeds that they would use in their garden for next year because it kept a dry, constant temperature, and it maintained the seeds real well. They would also take this bucket gourd, and if they wanted to dye something like strands of fiber to make basket weaving or cloth to make clothing, they'd put that red dye in there and put it down there and let it soak. And the longer it soaked, the darker the color would get. So that's called a bucket gourd. Now then, the Cherokees also loved music, and they made musical instruments from plants. And this is a flute made from river cane. And they would just take a section of this river cane and hollow it out, drill holes in it, and they would make a flute. Now, I'm not a flute player, but I just wanted you to be able to hear what this sounds like. I know he's a professional flute player who plays nothing but flutes made out of native plants in Oklahoma, a friend of mine. And so this is something they would use in what's called stomp dances at night to provide music. And so they made musical instruments with that. this is a necklace, and it's made out of beads. And girls would wear these because it would remind them of their history, of their culture and history, because the beads of the color mean different things to the Cherokees. And so this was something that was very popular even today, and all the multicolors that you find in it. I wonder if anybody can guess what this is. Well, I tell you, this right here is actually part of a deer's horn. And that horn, they would tie to a stick, tied on there, and they would use this to scratch the soil to make a hole to put either beans or corn seed in as they were planting. But it also makes a great back scratcher too. Now then, the Cherokees also used deer skin. And the deer skin, I've got a sample here. There's two different types of deer skin. You know, a male deer is called a buck. The female deer is called a doe. So the male skin is buckskin, and the female skin is doe skin. And the buckskin is thicker and heavier, and that's what the Cherokees would make moccasins out of, or the shoes. And the lighter doe skin would be used for clothing. They'd make clothing out of it. But that was very much used on a regular basis. In fact, the Cherokees even traded with European settlers using deer skins. It was a way of raising money. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today is sequoia. And sequoia, this is a picture of sequoia, and this is really significant because he was the one who developed the Cherokee syllabary. And this is what the Cherokee syllabary looks like. And this is how we communicate in Cherokee today. And each one of these little figures had a different sound associated with it. So when you saw that, you know what that sounded like. And so when you make that sound and you see this written out, you can speak Cherokee by knowing the 82 different symbols that it represents. I hope this really interests you. I know that it's a passion that I have, and it's one that is a rich heritage that we share, both the Cherokee people and the citizens of Georgia. We share a common heritage and history, and it's important that we understand that. So what I want to say in closing is Wado. Thank you, because you've been very attentive. And if you have any questions, you can have your teacher forward them to me, and I will answer them. And I hope you have a great day. And so, Wado.